Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring, and my first video as I begin a new project trying to paint a copy of Warhammer Quest Cursed City using Army Painter Speedpaints. For those of you who don't know, Speedpaints are a new range of one coat and done paints. The idea is you can very quickly and easily paint up a large selection of miniatures simply by applying one coat of each colour, and then the paint will do all of the shading and highlighting work for you. In this series I'm mainly going to be looking at how well the product does that. How quickly can I paint Warhammer Quest Cursed City to a reasonable tabletop standard using this one coat solution. However, we will be looking at other things as well, little tricks, little things we can do, and we will also be using some other elements of the Army Painter range. We're going to begin our project by painting up the 4 mysterious objects from Cursed City. We are first going to do the 2 hanging skeletons, and we are going to do them as quickly and simply as possible using Speedpaints as a one coat solution. We are then going to look at the 2 ravens, and we will use some slightly more sophisticated processes for painting those. The Speedpaints are designed to go over matte white skeleton bone or necrotic flesh. I have spray painted my skeletons with Army Painter skeleton bone. It seemed like a good idea as it's predominantly a skeleton and a piece of wood. Over the course of the series I will be using all 3 different base coats to see what kind of effects we can get. Once our base coat is completely dry, we can start painting. We are obviously going to be mainly using pallid bone here. And we're going to be applying this using the monster brush that comes in the Speedpaints starter set, which is a very good brush and a very useful brush for putting on these Speedpaints. And I'm taking my time a little bit here, but you don't really need to. With a skeleton like this, there's no other fine details you need to worry about overpainting or anything. You can just slop the paint on, making sure it goes into all of the recesses. One of the things I did notice very early on when using the Speedpaints, sometimes because of the nature of the paint and the way it pulls and pushes itself around the miniature, you do occasionally get these tiny little pinprick spots where you can see the base coat coming through, where the paint is almost like parted over perhaps a little blemish or something in the model. So you just really need to make sure before you are finished with a particular coat, just go back over the model, just look very carefully, make sure you aren't getting any tiny little separated spots. It was just something that I noticed on the few miniatures that I worked on. One of the things that has been discussed quite a lot about these Speedpaints is the fact they can reactivate. That means when you put another coat over a coat of Speedpaint, the paint can come back to life again and they will start to bleed and mix together. This is something we will be looking at more, I'm sure, as the series progresses. It is a feature of the paint, it's something that is in the formula of the paint, and it is worth keeping in mind while you're painting to try and minimise any overspill onto other areas of the miniature where you are going to be applying different coats of paint. For example here, I want to make sure that I do not get any of the skeleton bone on the skeleton's hood. And in addition to the skeleton, we are going to be using this skeleton bone on the rope and also on the small piece of parchment that is nailed to the gallows. Next we need to paint that gallows itself, and we're going to use hardened leather for this, which is from the starter set. I want to make sure it doesn't make any tide lines or anything, so just a smooth coat over all of those surfaces. And I found this went on very nicely, and I thought that the hardened leather was a really nice rich brown over the top of this skeleton bone. I have to wonder if it would look quite as nice over a matte white base. I think perhaps the skeleton bone base coat is just giving it a slightly richer, warmer finish. Something I am sure we will discover as we continue through the series. And even with just those 2 coats of paint applied, it's already looking pretty decent. We're going to use orc skin, and we're just going to apply this to the little bits of grass and roots at the base of the miniature. And again, this is going to go on very quickly, very easily. We just want to make sure we don't get it over any of the areas we've already painted, but it really is just a few seconds with paintbrush in hand. I should say I have found it is worth waiting for each coat to dry before applying the next one. If you're working on multiple miniatures at once, that's not a big problem. Just move on to the next miniature. By the time you get back to the first one you started with, it'll be dry, you can carry on. Finally, we're going to use some Gravelord Grey, and we're going to do this over the hood of the skeleton. And I would say that this was my least favourite part of the miniature. I don't think the Gravelord Grey looks particularly nice over the skeleton bone. It perhaps would have been a nicer finish over a matte white. Regardless, once this is applied and dried, that's us finished with Speedpaints on this miniature. And there we have the 2 mysterious objects from the set. I will of course do bases for these, you'll see those later in the video, but I'll be using Games Workshop products for that. I'm just going to use some Sterling mud and some regular Citadel paints for dry brushing and finishing them off. Next up we need to look at the Raven, and I have started this Raven by spray coating it with a black primer, and then I have done a Zenithal highlight with a matte white spray can. To do a zenithal highlight, you literally just hold the can about 40 centimeters away from the miniature, quite a distance from the miniature because you don't want to apply a really thick coat of it, and then you can either do a spray directly from the top or at maybe a 45-degree angle, wherever you want the light source to come from. You just spray down on the miniature, give it a dusting of that white. It's going to pick out all the raised details. And we're going to see how this works with the speed paint to create deeper shadows and more raised highlights. We're also going to do a few other little techniques with this particular miniature, which will take a little bit more time and effort than just using the speed paint straight from the bottle. First of all, we're going to our Gravelord Grey, and we're going to apply a coat of this over the Raven itself and all of the pillar areas. As we are applying it, we want to avoid putting it over the key because we're going to be doing something different with the key, and we want to avoid as much as possible all of the vines and the grass areas. So I'm just working all the way around the miniature, applying a good thick coat. These miniatures have got some good, nice, deep details, so these speed paints will really go into those recesses and really help to make all those details pop. Next, we are getting some Army Painter Matte White, and this is the same colour as the Matte White spray primer that they sell. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to apply it over all of the grass and vines, because we're going to put some green on those vines, and putting the green straight onto the black isn't going to look great. So what I'm doing is I'm thinning down the matte white a little bit, and I'm going to apply it in a slightly sketchy, haphazard manner. So I'm going to leave the dark areas in the recesses, I'm going to thin the paint out a little bit, leave darker areas at the sides. Like I said, just a little bit sketchy, a little bit rough. So we're going to have different degrees of the coloration going over the vines. There will be some areas where it's very white and therefore the green will really pop in those areas. There will be areas where it's darker and the green will be more subdued. And that should just help us to give a little bit more interesting contrast and a little bit more shade and variety, rather than just having that green speed paint going straight over white. So once that white is completely dry, we're going to use our orc skin, and we're just going to apply it and make sure we cover all of the white areas, but also make sure we go over all of the black areas of the vines, anywhere where that white hasn't reached. It doesn't matter if you go slightly onto the stonework around the vine. That's just going to help it sort of hang together as a miniature, but also any green tinges, you would expect that as a vine is growing up around the pillar, there would be moss, there would be that green hue. So we're just going to work around all of those vines, and you will get something like that. You can see, because of the way that we haphazardly applied that white, you do have different variations in the green tone. Next, we're getting some shining silver. Again, this isn't a speed paint either. And I'm applying this to the key because we're going to do a little trick here that I love doing with inks when I'm painting traditionally. If you saw my Hero Quest painting guides, you may have seen me do this with the Chaos Warriors there, where I will apply metallic paint over something like armor or a shield, and then I will apply maybe a green, red or purple ink, and you get these really nice vibrant metallic colors. For this key, what we want to do is use the hardened leather to try and make this key look like it's coppery or rusty maybe. And you can see we get a really nice coppery rich colour, and I think that's worked pretty nicely. And we're nearly there, but the base is just a little bit too dark, it's not distinct enough from the Raven. So we're going to do a dry brush just on the rock pillar. I'm going to use some Army Painter Ash Grey, I'm going to do a dry brush over all the stone areas. And when it's done, we've ended up with something that I think looks pretty nice. I think it's got a nice stark look to it. I think it's very in keeping with the tone of Cursed City, and I'm pretty happy with how that's turned out, considering it wasn't a lot of work. As I mentioned, the final thing to do is to put these on bases. This is just some Sterling mud, which has then been dry brushed, and then I've given them bases of Retributor armor, just to make them stand out on the battlefield. And there we have it. I hope you've liked this first look at the speed paints in use on Cursed City. There will be more to come. If you have liked the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really liked the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.